What's up, everybody? It's Heidi Fang here, and I'm joined by Sam Gordon. It's time for us to break down the off-season for the Las Vegas Raiders in this video series that we're bringing to you. We've got to start it off with Derek Carr at the helm here, driving the ship for the Raiders. We got to figure out, first of all, what is going to happen with his contract extension with this team?
Yeah, Heidi, I think that's the biggest question the Raiders have to answer, and their new brass has to answer before the 2022 season. Derek Carr, of course, only has the 1 year left on his contract at $19.9 million, so roughly $20 million, but that's far below market value for a contract that he signed in 2017. So now you take a look, what does this new regime think of Derek Carr? Well, I would guess they wouldn't have taken the job without him in place. I think he's one of the appeals. You take a look at the job openings around the NFL. He, to me, seemed like the most proven, most reliable quarterback out of the bunch, and for good reason. You take a look at the last 4 years, he's one of only 4 quarterbacks in the NFL to eclipse 4,000 yards in passing. He's one of the most accurate passers in the league, and we saw what he was able to shoulder without his head coach, the previous head coach, and John Gruden, losing top receiver in Henry Ruggs, and just the issues they had on the offensive line all year. I think when you take a look at a contract extension, and our colleague Vinny Bonsignore has floated these numbers around, something like 2 years, $80 million, you tack those on, it becomes a 3 year, $100 million extension, kind of where the market's at right now. That Patrick Mahomes is set, of course, him being who he is, $45 million a year, he kind of sets the bar. Josh Allen, $43 million. And then Dak Prescott, who I think is a quarterback comparable in skill set to Derek Carr and comparable in production, he's making roughly $40 million. So if you take the 19.9, you add 2 years, $80 million, it becomes roughly 3 years, $100 million, $33.3 million per season. Very affordable, gives flexibility to both sides, and it feels like that would be feasible and realistic for both sides going into the 2022 season.
You mentioned the passing yards there, 4,000 plus on the season, but it only translated to 23 touchdowns in the end. So I wanted to get into these numbers a little bit and figure out what you think the red zone struggle is and how Josh McDaniels can construct an offense in which the touchdowns are much more than 23 with that 4,000 passing yard number.
Yeah, Heidi, I mean, that's huge, right? I mean, the way the NFL is played these days, teams are going to move the ball in between the 20s. It's really about how good you are at scoring in the red zone and how good you are getting stops in the red zone. And you take a look at the Raiders in 2021, 29th in the NFL in red zone touchdown percentage at 49.23%. Frankly, obviously, that's not good enough. I think it's a personnel thing. When you take a look at the Raiders specifically this past season, we know about the issues up front. I think as a result, they weren't quite able to get Josh Jacobs going, and then you lose a big-time playmaker in Henry Ruggs. So I think if you can add a receiver, and we can talk about that moving forward about what they can do in the draft or free agency, but get better on the perimeter and then shore up that offensive line, you become a little bit more versatile. You're able to run the ball. That sets up some play action in the red zone and do a number of different things.
When you think about Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels' system and how it might work under Mick Lombardi, what kind of do you see in the forecast for him?
Well, I think one thing that bodes well for Derek Carr when it comes to these new coaches he's going to be working with is his accuracy, Heidi. We know that Derek Carr is one of the most accurate passers in the NFL over the last 4 years, completing 68.7% of his passes. That's right near the top of the league. That is pretty much as good as it gets. Particularly, I think his strengths are in that short and intermediate game, right? We know the Raiders had their issues going down the field, particularly in the second half of the season. But even earlier in the year, a lot of that bread and butter, I guess, in lieu of a non-existent running game, was some of those short passes, getting the ball to playmakers in space at the first and second levels of the defense. If you take a look at what they were able to do in New England, that's what Mac Jones was essentially doing. And of course, Derek Carr, given that he's a veteran, given his experience, and of course his arm strength and his ability to push the ball down the field, I think you're going to see that playbook open up a lot more and kind of resemble what it resembled when Tom Brady was the quarterback for the New England Patriots as opposed to Mac Jones. So I think there's going to be a balance, short, intermediate, but certainly some deep shots as well. And I know that'll excite Raider fans because it seemed like those were few and far between, especially towards the end of the season.
Yeah, you mentioned those deep shots. Well, how do they get there? Who's going to come in? There's all this talk, Davante Adams, maybe because Green Bay hasn't franchise tagged him yet. What do you think about that possibility? Or is there another guy that you think could really play complementary football with Derek Carr?
Depending on what Green Bay does with Davante Adams, if he does hit the open market and becomes a free agent, you would expect the Raiders to certainly pursue or have conversations with him and his representation. Right now, there's also the cap concerns right now. The highest paid receiver in the NFL is DeAndre Hopkins. He's making little north of $27 million. So the Raiders brass or whoever goes after, and of course, Davante Adams, should he hit the open market, has to consider, do you want to pay $28-29 million for a 29-year-old wide receiver who, as we know, played with Aaron Rodgers? That probably has something to do with his greatness. But nonetheless, with what he's able to do, he's physical at the point of attack. He can go up and get the ball, make plays on the ball. He's great after the catch. He blocks. Great hands, ball skills. There's nothing he can't do. Good enough speed to get deep. And of course, one of the most proficient route runners in the NFL. I would definitely expect the Raiders to at least gauge interest with him. And of course, we've seen kind of some of the back and forth on social media and some of the comments that those guys have made about each other publicly. It's still clear that there's a lot of love between Derek Carr and his former number one receiver in college, Davante Adams. Can they reduplicate that in Vegas? We'll see what happens as the offseason continues.
All right, a lot of talk about Derek Carr here, but there's a couple other guys that made up the quarterback depth chart. Wanted to get your take first on Marcus Mariota. And do you think that he will be retained by the new head coaching staff?
I mean, I certainly think it's a possibility. I would imagine there'd probably be more lucrative offers for him elsewhere. I think maybe even a chance to start, given some of the uncertainty at quarterback that so many of these teams are facing. But it's if he does come back to Las Vegas, he's proven, I think, to be a reliable backup. I would be surprised if Nate Peterman comes back. He seemed kind of more like a John Gruden. Somebody John Gruden took a liking to and wanted to develop. So I'm not necessarily sure there. Maybe it's a thing where, Heidi, if you extend Derek Carr, you draft a quarterback in the later rounds to have him serve as the backup those first couple of years on the cheap, and then you can kind of evaluate and see what happens there, depending on how short or long-term that contract is. So there's flexibility at the backup quarterback position, but the most important thing, of course, is getting number 4, figuring out what's going to happen with him in his future.
What can he improve upon in 2022, Sam?
Yeah, Heidi, I think the biggest thing has to be the turnovers, right? I think towards the end of the year there, the ball security was really an issue. You go back 14 interceptions, 5 lost fumbles, and then 13 fumbles total. That ranks near the top of the NFL. And those are things that can't happen, especially when in a situation like it was last year, when it was an offense in so dire need of points in so many of those games. So I think that's something he's addressed publicly. He knows he needs to take better care of the football at times, and it's something that you would expect the new coaching staff to work with. But their job is to put him in positions to make the best possible decisions with the football. And I would expect that, given this new staff, given the sense that we get how they feel about him, we might see the best version of Derek Carr yet.
Great stuff as always, Sam. I appreciate the time here today, and make sure to keep up with the off-season video series on vegasnation.com. And we will be back with more soon. You can catch him at By Sam Gordon. I'm at Heidi Fang. For both of us, appreciate you watching.